Part 1. The stars looked different from this side of the galaxy. Jake Morrison stood at the viewing window of the horizon's edge, watching the blue giant sun of Voria Prime grow larger as their ship approached. He had been preparing for this moment for 6 months, ever since Earth's government received the invitation from the Vorian Empire. This was humanity's chance to join the galactic community properly, to be recognized by one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in known space. Jake ran his hand through his short brown hair and adjusted his formal uniform. Behind him, Lisa Grant was going over her translation equipment one more time. She was nervous, he could tell. Her fingers kept tapping against the small device attached to her ear. Peter Hayes sat quietly in the corner, reading through his notes on Vorian customs and protocols. They had all studied everything they could find about the Vorians, but information was limited. The Empire didn't share much about themselves with species they considered beneath them. The Vorians had dominated their section of space for over 10,000 years. Their technology was impressive, their cities magnificent, their military powerful. They were also incredibly proud. Every species that had joined the galactic community had to gain Vorian approval first. It was tradition. It was law. It was the way things worked. The ship's computer announced their arrival at Voria Prime. Jake took a deep breath and turned to his team. Lisa looked up from her equipment and Peter closed his notebook. They exchanged glances. No words were needed. They all knew what was at stake. The planet below was beautiful. 3 moons orbited around it, and the surface sparkled with massive cities of crystal and metal. The Vorians had built their civilization to impress, and it worked. Jake had seen pictures, but seeing it in person was different. It made Earth look young and small by comparison. Their ship was guided to a landing platform near the royal palace. As they descended, Jake could see the structure rising above the city like a mountain of glass and light. It was enormous, designed to make visitors feel insignificant. He understood the psychology behind it. The Vorians wanted everyone to know their place from the moment they arrived. The landing was smooth. Jake led his team down the ramp to find a group of Vorian officials waiting for them. The Vorians were tall, averaging about 7 feet in height. Their skin had a slight purple tint, and their eyes were large and golden. They wore flowing robes that seemed to shimmer with their own light. Everything about them spoke of elegance and ancient culture. The lead official, whose name Jake understood to be Chancellor Mortek, greeted them with a slight bow. It was the minimum gesture of respect, just barely polite. Jake returned the bow, matching the depth exactly. He had learned that showing too much deference would mark humanity as weak, while showing too little would be seen as aggressive ignorance. "Commander Morrison," the Chancellor said, his voice carrying an odd musical quality. "The Empress will receive you now. Follow. No welcome speech. No tour, no hospitality. Just straight to business." Jake had expected this. The Vorians didn't waste time on species they hadn't yet deemed worthy. They walked through corridors of crystal that seemed to glow from within. Vorian citizens stopped to stare at the humans, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. Some whispered to each other. Jake kept his eyes forward and his posture confident. He wouldn't give them any reason to see humans as timid or uncertain. The throne room was exactly as magnificent as Jake had imagined. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, and the walls were made of a crystal that reflected light in rainbow patterns. At the far end, elevated on a platform, sat the Empress on her throne. Even from a distance, Jake could see she was impressive. Her robes were more elaborate than anyone else's, and she wore a crown that seemed to be made of captured starlight. Standing beside the throne was a younger Vorian female. She had to be Princess Kiranel, the Empress's youngest daughter. Jake had read about her in the limited files available. She was considered brilliant by Vorian standards, well-educated in history and diplomacy, and being groomed for a major role in the Empire's future. She was also young, which by Vorian standards meant she was only about 60 years old. For a species that lived for centuries, she was barely an adult. The Chancellor led them to the center of the room, and then stepped aside. Jake and his team stopped at the appropriate distance and bowed. This time, Jake bowed deeper. This was the Empress, after all, and showing proper respect to a head of state was different from bowing to every official they met. "Empress Zarathel," Jake said clearly, "on behalf of humanity and Earth, I thank you for receiving us. We come in peace and friendship, hoping to learn from your wisdom and share what little we have to offer." He had practiced these words many times. They were humble without being servile, respectful without being weak. Lisa stepped forward and presented a container with gifts from Earth. They had chosen carefully, examples of human art, samples of Earth's music, and a few pieces of technology that showed human creativity, even if they weren't as advanced as Vorian tech. The Empress regarded them in silence for a long moment. Her golden eyes seemed to look right through Jake, evaluating everything about him. Then she spoke, her voice filling the chamber effortlessly. "Humanity, a species that has only just left its birth world, a species without psionic abilities, without natural defenses, with lifespans that are over in the blink of an eye. Yet you come here seeking recognition." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, delivered without warmth or hostility. Just observation. "We understand we are young compared to your great civilization," Jake replied, "but we hope that youth brings fresh perspectives and energy to contribute to the galactic community." Before the Empress could respond, Princess Kira Nell laughed. It was a musical sound, light and pretty, but there was no humor in it. It was the laugh of someone who found something absurd. The princess stepped forward, her movements graceful and deliberate. She looked down at Jake from the platform, her expression one of amused condescension. "Fresh perspectives," she repeated, as if the words were funny. "Is that what you call it?" She turned to address the court, speaking in her own language, but Lisa's translator picked it up instantly and whispered the translation into Jake's ear. "Look at them," the princess said, standing there so proud. "They bring us their little gifts as if we need anything from a species that still struggles with basic space travel. They think they belong here, among true civilizations." She turned back to Jake, switching to the common galactic language so he would understand her directly. "Tell me, human, what makes you think you're ready for this? Your people have been in space for what? Less than 100 of your years? We have been traveling the stars since before your species learned to write." Jake stood quietly, his face neutral. He could feel Lisa tense beside him, and Peter's breathing had become carefully controlled. But Jake remained calm, listening. "You have no psionic powers," the princess continued, warming to her subject. "You can't communicate mind to mind like civilized species. You have no natural armor, no claws, no venom. Your bodies are so fragile that your own planet's environment can kill you in dozens of ways. You live for perhaps 80, maybe 90 of your years if you're lucky. I will live for centuries. Do you understand what that means? It means you will be dead and forgotten while I am still young." She walked along the platform, her robes flowing behind her. "Your technology is primitive. Your culture is young and untested. Your achievements are minor compared to what real civilizations have accomplished. You haven't faced the challenges that forge a true spacefaring people. You haven't earned the right to stand in this room." The court was silent. Some of the Vorian officials looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up. The Empress watched her daughter with an unreadable expression, neither encouraging nor stopping her. "So I ask you again, Commander Morrison," the princess said, stopping to look directly at him. "Why should we waste our time acknowledging creatures who will be dust before we've even finished this century? What possible value could you offer to us? Give me one reason why we should see you as anything other than children playing at civilization." The question hung in the air. Every eye in the throne room was on Jake. Lisa and Peter were watching him, waiting to follow his lead. The Vorian court was watching, expecting either anger or desperate justification. The Empress was watching with those golden eyes that missed nothing. And the princess stood there, confident in her superiority, waiting for his answer. Jake looked at the princess for a long moment. Then he looked at the Empress. Then he looked at his team. His expression remained calm and neutral throughout. He took a slow breath and made his decision. "Lisa, Peter," he said quietly, "pack the gifts. We're leaving." Lisa blinked in surprise. "Commander?" Jake's voice was steady and clear. "This was a mistake. We came here in good faith, but good faith requires both sides. We won't find that here today." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue or defend humanity. He didn't try to list human achievements or potential. He simply turned toward the exit and began walking. His team hesitated for just a second, then quickly gathered the gifts and followed him. The throne room erupted in confused murmurs. This wasn't the reaction. The council chamber on Earth was quieter than Jake had expected. He stood before the representatives of various governments, military leaders and diplomatic officials, all waiting for his report. The room was simple compared to the Vorian throne room. with plain walls and practical furniture. But Jake preferred it that way. There was honesty and simplicity. Admiral Kate Pierce sat at the center of the long table, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been one of the strongest supporters of the Vorian mission, believing that gaining their approval was essential for humanity's future in space. Now she looked at Jake with an expression that was hard to read. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Commander Morrison," she said slowly. "You walked out. You simply turned around and left." Jake stood at attention. "Yes, Admiral," without attempting negotiation, without defending humanity's achievements, without even trying to salvage the meeting. "That's correct, Admiral." The room was silent for a moment. Then someone at the far end of the table spoke up. It was Director Carlos Martinez from the Diplomatic Corps. "Commander, do you understand what you've done? The Vorians are the gateway to the galactic community. Every major species recognizes their authority. Without their approval, we'll be shut out of trade agreements, defense pacts, and resource sharing. You may have just isolated humanity for generations." Jake had expected this. "With respect, Director, I disagree. What I did was establish that humanity has standards. If the price of joining the galactic community is accepting treatment like that, then maybe we don't want to join. Not yet, not on those terms." Admiral Pierce leaned forward. "Explain your reasoning." Jake took a breath. This was the moment that mattered. The princess insulted us, not just casually but deliberately and thoroughly. She questioned everything about humanity, our worth, our right to even be in that room, and she did it in front of their entire court. "And that made you angry," Martinez said. "No," Jake replied. "It made me understand something. This was a test, but not the kind we thought. They weren't testing whether we could be polite or diplomatic. They were testing whether we would accept being treated as inferiors. If I had argued with her, tried to prove humanity's worth, I would have been playing by their rules. Rules where they get to judge us and we have to justify our existence to them." Lisa Grant spoke up from where she stood beside Jake. The translator caught something interesting. While the princess was speaking, some of the Vorian officials looked uncomfortable. Not everyone in that room agreed with how she was treating us, but they all stayed silent because that's their culture. Hierarchy and deference to authority. Peter Hayes added his observation. The Empress never stopped her daughter. She could have, but she didn't. She was allowing it to happen, watching how we would respond. Our reaction mattered more than any speech we could have given. Admiral Pierce was listening carefully. "And you believe walking out was the right response?" "I believe it was the only response that would work in the long term," Jake said. "Think about it from their perspective. If we got angry, we'd look primitive and emotional. If we begged for acceptance, we'd look weak. But by walking away calmly and with dignity, we did something they didn't expect. We showed them that we don't need their approval to know our own worth." An older man at the table cleared his throat. This was Ambassador Henry Clark, one of Earth's most experienced diplomats. "In my 40 years of service, I've learned that sometimes the boldest move is to walk away from the table. But Commander, you've gambled with humanity's entire future in galactic politics. I hope you're right." The discussion continued for hours. Some supported Jake's decision, others were furious about it. But by the end of the meeting, a decision had been reached. Humanity would not go back to the Vorians seeking another audience. Instead, Earth would focus on building relationships with other species, smaller civilizations that didn't demand submission as the price of friendship. Jake left the council chamber feeling tired but certain he had done the right thing. Lisa caught up with him in the hallway. "Do you think it will work?" she asked. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But I know that respect you have to beg for isn't real respect. We'll find our place in the galaxy, just not on our knees." Meanwhile, on Voria Prime, the throne room had finally emptied. Princess Kiranel stood alone with her mother, the Empress. The younger woman was still upset, pacing back and forth on the platform. "He insulted us," Kiranel said. "He walked out as if we meant nothing. As if our opinion didn't matter. The audacity of it." Empress Zarathel sat on her throne, silent and thoughtful. She had been watching the recordings of the meeting, studying the human commander's face during her daughter's speech. His expression had remained calm throughout, not blank or emotionless, but controlled, deliberate. "Mother, you must do something," Kiranel insisted. "We should sanction them. Close our space to their ships. Make an example of them so other young species know they cannot disrespect the Empire." "No," the Empress said quietly. Kiranel stopped pacing. "No? Mother, I said no." The Empress's voice was gentle but firm. You humiliated them, daughter. In front of the entire court. You questioned their worth, their achievements, their very right to exist as a spacefaring people, and the commander's response was to leave with dignity rather than accept such treatment. That tells me something important. It tells you they're arrogant, Kiranel said. It tells me they have self-respect. The Empress corrected, and that is not the same thing as arrogance. She stood from her throne and walked to the window that overlooked the city. Do you know why the Vorian Empire has lasted so long, daughter? Because we are superior. Because we are strong. Partly, the Empress agreed, but also because we have been wise enough to recognize potential in others. The Kelvin Republic was a small trading federation when we first met them. Now they are one of our strongest allies. The Therian Collective was considered primitive by the standards of that time. Now their technology rivals our own in some areas. She turned to look at her daughter. Every great power we know today was once young and untested. What matters is not where they start, but where they're going. And more importantly, how they handle themselves when challenged. Kiranel frowned. You think the humans have potential? I think we don't know enough about them to make that judgment, the Empress said. Which is why you are going to study them. Every report, every piece of information we have. I want you to learn who these humans really are, beyond the brief research we did before the meeting, and then we will decide what to do. The princess wanted to argue, but she knew better than to push when her mother used that tone. She bowed her head in acceptance. Across the galaxy, humanity was already moving forward. Jake's report had spread through Earth's government and military. While some officials were still angry about the failed meeting, others saw opportunity. The decision was made to focus on what Earth had been quietly doing for the past few years, building relationships with smaller, younger civilizations. Species that didn't care about hierarchy and ancient traditions, species that were looking for partners, not masters. Within a week of returning from Voria Prime, Jake was sent on a new mission, this time to a species called the Renthi, who lived on a desert world 3 systems away from Earth's nearest colony. The Renthi were having water shortage problems, and they had sent out a general request for help. Jake's ship, along with 2 others, carried water purification equipment and teams of engineers to help install it. When they arrived, the Renthi greeted them with genuine warmth. These people weren't testing humanity or judging their worth. They were just grateful for help. Jake worked alongside the Renthi engineers for 2 weeks, sharing knowledge and learning about their culture. They were a practical people, focused on survival in their harsh environment. They cared more about whether someone could solve problems than about how long their civilization had existed. On the last day, the Renthi leader, an elderly female named Essa, thanked Jake personally. Your people have kind hearts, she said. You came far to help strangers. We're all trying to survive out here, Jake replied. Helping each other makes sense. Essa smiled, her weathered face crinkling. The old empires, they would have helped us too, but they would have asked for something in return. Payment or loyalty or submission. You asked for nothing. We asked to be friends, Jake said, if that's acceptable. More than acceptable, Essa agreed. That friendship became official a month later when the Renthi and humans signed a mutual aid agreement. It was simple and straightforward. If either species needed help, the other would provide it if they could. No hierarchy, no demands, just cooperation between equals. Other species took notice. A mining colony having trouble with pirates asked for human help. Jake and a small defense force went, not to take over security but to teach the miners how to defend themselves better. They shared tactics and equipment, then left when the job was done. An agricultural world wanted to improve their crop yields. Human scientists went and worked with local farmers, sharing techniques that Earth had developed over centuries. They adapted the methods to work with local conditions and crops, always respecting that the farmers knew their own land best. 6 months had passed since Jake Morrison walked out of the Vorian throne room. In that time, humanity had been busy. Earth ships traveled constantly between systems, carrying supplies, equipment, and people willing to help wherever help was needed. The pattern was always the same. Find someone who needed assistance, provide it without demanding payment or submission, and move on. Jake stood on the observation deck of Terra Station, humanity's largest orbital platform. It had been built in the past year to serve as a hub for all the new trade and diplomatic activity. Through the window, he could see dozens of ships from different species coming and going. The station was becoming a meeting place for smaller civilizations that wanted to trade and talk without dealing with the rigid protocols of the old empires. Lisa walked up beside him, carrying a datapad. 3 more agreements signed today, she said. The Ventari want our help with their communications network, and in exchange they're offering to teach us their mining techniques. The Polis are interested in cultural exchange programs, and the Corans want to open a trade route, Jake smiled. Not bad for a primitive species that only learned to write recently, Lisa laughed. It had become a joke among the human diplomatic teams, repeating the insults Princess Kiranel had thrown at them. The sting had faded, replaced by a sort of proud defiance. Let the Vorians think humanity was primitive. The humans would prove their worth through actions, not words. How many is that total now? Jake asked. 23 species with formal agreements. Another 40 or so with regular trade relationships, and the Coalition of Free Worlds now has 15 members. Lisa looked at her datapad. Admiral Pierce wants to talk to you later. Something about expanding the defense sharing program. The Coalition of Free Worlds had been Jake's idea. Instead of everyone making separate agreements with everyone else, why not form a loose alliance where members helped each other? There was no central authority, no hierarchy, just a commitment that if one member was in trouble, the others would help if they could. It was working better than anyone had expected, but not everyone was happy about humanity's success. The old empires, the Vorians in particular, were watching with concern. These new alliances were forming outside their control, outside their traditional power structures. Some of the younger species who had been client states of the Vorians were asking questions about why they couldn't have the same kind of equal partnerships the humans were offering. On Voria Prime, Princess Kiranel was preparing for a journey. Empress Zarathel had given her a task: travel to several of the Vorian client states and check on their loyalty. It was meant to be a routine diplomatic tour, something young royals did to gain experience and show the Empire's presence. But the Empress had a second unspoken purpose. She wanted her daughter to see firsthand what was changing in the galaxy. The princess's ship was magnificent, as befitted her station. It was large and elegant, with a crew of 200 and guards to ensure her safety. Her first stop was Kelvin 4, a mining colony that had been under Vorian protection for centuries. They produced rare metals that the Empire needed, and in exchange, the Vorians provided military defense and technology. When her ship landed, Kiranel was greeted by the colonial governor, an older man named Trent who had served the Empire faithfully for decades. He bowed deeply as she descended from her ship, and she acknowledged him with the slight nod that was appropriate for someone of his lower status. "Your Highness honors us with your presence," Trent said formally. "We have prepared a banquet in your honor and arranged for you to tour our facilities." The tour was thorough. Trent showed her the mines, the processing facilities, and the defensive installations that Vorian military had established. Everything seemed normal and proper. But Kiranel noticed something unusual. In one of the administrative buildings, she saw equipment she didn't recognize. The design was different from Vorian technology. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to a machine that seemed to be purifying water. Trent hesitated for just a moment. "That is a gift from the humans, Your Highness. They visited 3 months ago on a trade mission. Our water recycling system had been failing, and repair parts from Voria Prime would have taken 6 months to arrive. The humans offered to help while we waited." Kiranel studied the machine more closely. It was simpler than Vorian technology, more compact, and from what she could see on the display screens, it was working efficiently. "And what did they ask for in return?" "Nothing, Your Highness. They said that neighbors help neighbors." Trent's voice was carefully neutral, but Kiranel heard something in it. Appreciation, maybe. "Or respect, I see," she said quietly. "And has the Vorian equipment arrived yet?" "Yes, Your Highness. 2 months ago, but you're still using the human equipment." "It works well, Your Highness, and our workers have learned to maintain it themselves. The Vorian system requires specialists from the Empire to repair. This one our own people can handle." That was significant. One of the ways the Vorian Empire maintained control was by providing technology that client states couldn't fully maintain themselves. It ensured dependence. But if the humans were sharing simpler technology that people could manage on their own, that changed the dynamic. Kiranel said nothing more about it, but she made a note. At the banquet that night, She listened carefully to the conversations around her. The colonists were respectful and proper, as always. But she heard them mention the humans several times, always in positive terms. The humans who had helped with the water system. The human trader who had been fair in his dealings. The human doctor who had shared new medical techniques. Her next stop was an agricultural world called Planara. It was a beautiful planet of vast fields and forests, and its people, the Planari, had been Vorian clients for almost 1,000 years. They provided food for several Vorian worlds and military stations. The Planari leader, a woman named Shira, welcomed Kiranel with traditional ceremonies. But here too the princess noticed changes. As she toured the farms, she saw new irrigation systems and planting patterns she didn't recognize. "These techniques are new," she observed. Shira nodded, pride evident in her voice. "Yes, Your Highness. Human agricultural specialists visited us 5 months ago. They studied our soil and climate, then suggested these methods. Our crop yields have increased by 30%. And what did they want for this knowledge?" Shira seemed puzzled by the question. "Want?" "They wanted to share a meal with us and learn about our farming traditions. They said that Earth had learned its agricultural methods from centuries of trial and error, and there was no reason we should have to repeat all those same mistakes, so they just told us what worked for them." Kiranel walked through the fields watching the Planari farmers work. They seemed happier than she remembered from previous visits. More confident. There was a subtle shift in how they carried themselves. That evening, Shira spoke more freely over dinner. "Your Highness, may I ask you something?" "You may." "The humans, they treat us as equals. They ask our opinions. They listen when we explain our needs. They adapt their help to what we actually require, not what they think we should want." Shira paused, choosing her words carefully. Why have we never had that kind of relationship with the Empire? It was a dangerous question. Questioning the Empire's ways could be seen as disloyalty. But Kiranel found she didn't have a good answer. Because we're superior, she thought automatically. Because that's how it's always been done. But those answers felt hollow now. "The Empire has protected you for centuries," Kiranel said instead. "We have provided technology and security." "Yes," Shira agreed. "And we are grateful. But protection and partnership are different things, aren't they?" Kiranel left Planara troubled. The pattern continued at every stop on her tour. A space station using human-designed life support improvements. A research outpost where scientists spoke excitedly about collaborative projects with human researchers. A trading hub where merchants praised human honesty and fair dealing. Everywhere she went, people were talking about the humans. Not as potential invaders or threats, but as friends and partners. Species that had been loyal. Vorian clients for generations were now asking why their relationship with the Empire couldn't be more like their relationship with humanity. The breaking point came on a small station called Outpost Meridian. It was a listening post on the edge of Vorian space, monitoring for pirates and other threats. The commander there was a Vorian officer named Court, someone Kiranel had known slightly at court. Court welcomed her properly. But when they were alone in his office, he spoke more frankly than others had dared. "Your Highness, I'm going to be honest with you because someone needs to be. We have a problem." "Explain." 3 weeks ago, pirates attacked a civilian convoy near here, 4 ships carrying families and supplies. The attack happened just outside our patrol zone, so technically it wasn't our responsibility to respond. By the time we got there, the humans had already arrived. Court pulled up a recording on his screen. Kiranel watched as 3 human ships, smaller and less advanced than Vorian military vessels, engaged the pirates. The human tactics were aggressive and creative. They used their smaller size to their advantage, coordinating their movements in. Princess Kiranel returned to Voria Prime 3 weeks after her revelation at Outpost Meridian. She had spent those weeks finishing her diplomatic tour, but everything looked different now. She saw the way client states showed deference out of obligation rather than genuine respect. She noticed how Vorian officials spoke down to representatives of younger species. She felt the weight of centuries of assumed superiority in every interaction. The throne room felt colder than she remembered when she gave her report to Empress Zarathel. The other advisors were present, listening as Kiranel described her observations. She was honest about what she had seen. Human technology helping Vorian clients. Human actions earning respect and friendship. human philosophy spreading through species that had been loyal to the Empire for generations. They are undermining our authority, one of the older advisors said sharply, deliberately targeting our client states, offering them alternatives to Vorian support. This is a calculated strategy to weaken us. I don't think it is, Kiranel said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. She had never contradicted the senior advisors before. I think they're just helping anyone who asks. The fact that many of those asking happen to be in Vorian space is because there are a lot of species here who need help. Your Highness, another advisor said with barely concealed condescension. You are young. You don't understand the complexities of galactic politics. The humans are clearly playing a long game. Perhaps, Kiranel replied. Or perhaps we've been playing the wrong game for so long that we can't recognize sincerity when we see it. The advisor looked shocked. Speaking this way went against everything Vorian culture taught about respecting your elders and betters, but Kiranel had seen too much to stay silent. Empress Zara Thel raised her hand, silencing the murmurs that had started around the room. Continue, daughter. Mother, I have studied every report we have on human actions since Commander Morrison left this throne room. I have visited our client states and seen human influence firsthand. And I have come to a conclusion. She paused, gathering her courage. We were wrong. I was wrong. The way I treated Commander Morrison, the things I said to him were not sophisticated diplomacy. They were cruelty from a position of power. And he responded with dignity while I responded with arrogance. The throne room was completely silent. No one spoke this way about Vorian superiority. Especially not a princess in front of the entire court. The humans are not trying to undermine us, Kiranel continued. They are simply treating others the way they want to be treated themselves, with respect as equals, and because that's so rare in galactic politics, everyone responds to it. We could have had humanity as an ally. Instead, I insulted them and drove them away. And now they're building exactly the kind of coalition that could eventually rival our empire. Not because they're scheming against us, but because they're offering something we don't. Genuine partnership. The Empress studied her daughter for a long moment. And what do you suggest we do about this? I suggest we learn from them, Kiranel said. Not their technology, not their tactics. Their approach. Their willingness to see others as equals. We are ancient and powerful, yes, but power alone doesn't create lasting relationships. Respect does. Your Highness has been influenced by human philosophy, one advisor said dismissively. This is exactly why we must contain their influence before it spreads further. If their philosophy is so weak, Kiranel challenged, why is it spreading? Why are species responding to it? Maybe because after centuries of being told they're inferior, they're finally finding someone who treats them as valuable in their own right. The debate continued for hours. The court was divided. Some agreed with Kiranel that the Empire needed to adapt. Others insisted that Vorian ways had worked for millennia and shouldn't be changed because of one young species. But the Empress listened to everything, saying little, weighing all perspectives. That night, Zara Thel summoned her daughter to her private chambers. This was rare. The Empress conducted most business in formal settings. You have changed, Zara Thel observed. The daughter who left on that diplomatic tour is not the one who returned. I saw things that made me question what I had always believed, Kiranel admitted. I saw people helping each other without demanding submission in return. I saw respect given freely rather than extracted by power. And I saw that the things I said to Commander Morrison were wrong, not just diplomatically unwise but morally wrong. The Empress walked to her window looking out over the capital city. Do you know why I allowed you to speak as you did that day? Why I didn't stop you? No, Mother. Because I wanted to see how they would respond. I have read about humanity. They are warriors when they need to be, fierce and creative in battle. But they are also philosophers, artists, dreamers. I wanted to see which face they would show us when insulted. She turned back to her daughter. Commander Morrison showed restraint and dignity. And then he taught us a lesson by walking away. He taught us that humanity cannot be bullied or broken. That is valuable information. Kiranel felt a mixture of relief and frustration. So it was a test. But Mother, I said terrible things. Things that weren't true. Things meant to humiliate. Yes, you did, the Empress agreed calmly. And now you regret it. That growth, that understanding is why I sent you on this tour. I wanted you to see the consequences of your words. To understand that actions have repercussions beyond the moment they occur. What do we do now? Now? The Empress smiled slightly. Now we adapt. Not quickly, not obviously. The Empire is ancient and does not turn easily. But we begin to change how we engage with client states. More partnership, less domination. More respect, less assumed superiority. It will take time. And the humans? The humans will do what they have been doing. They will build their coalition, make their friends, help those who need it. And perhaps eventually they will be willing to talk with us again. But that is a long path, daughter, and it begins with acknowledgement of wrong done. Kiranel understood what her mother was suggesting. You want me to apologize? I want you to do what you believe is right. If that includes apologizing to Commander Morrison, then you must decide to do so on your own, not because I ordered it, but because you genuinely understand why it matters. The Empress dismissed her daughter, and Kiranel returned to her own chambers to think. An apology seemed simple enough. But for a Vorian princess to apologize to a human, to admit fault to a member of a species she had called primitive, that would be unprecedented. It would be seen as weakness by many in the Empire. It could damage her political standing, but it would also be right. She spent 3 days making her decision. She read everything available about Commander Morrison. He was 42 years old by human reckoning, meaning he was barely into middle age for his short-lived species. He had served in Earth's military for 20 years before moving into diplomacy. He was known for being direct, honest, and fair. He had a reputation for keeping his word and standing up for what he believed in. The reports showed he was currently assigned to Terra Station, coordinating the coalition of free worlds and managing various diplomatic initiatives. He was busy, important, respected by the species he worked with. He had moved on from the insult she had given him, using it as motivation rather than letting it define him. That made what she needed to do even more important. Kiranel made arrangements quietly. She didn't want an official delegation or formal ceremony. This needed to be personal. She booked passage on a civilian transport ship heading toward human space, bringing only 2 guards with her. Her mother knew what she was planning but said nothing to stop her. The journey took 12 days. Kiranel used the time to prepare what she would say. She wrote and rewrote her apology dozens of times, trying to get it right. It needed to be genuine, acknowledging the harm she had caused without making excuses. It needed to be respectful without being servile. It needed to be honest. When the transport ship finally docked at Terra Station, Kiranel felt nervous for the first time in her life. She was used to people deferring to her, making way for her, treating her as important. But here, on a human station, she was just another visitor. The staff checked her credentials politely, but without any special deference. They didn't bow or use elaborate titles. They just confirmed her identity and directed her to the guest facilities. She requested a meeting with Commander Morrison through official channels. The response came back within a few hours. He would see her in 3 days. Not immediately. Not dropped into his schedule as a priority. In 3 days when he had time available. It was humbling, and Kiranel realized that was probably intentional. He was teaching her another lesson, that her rank and title didn't automatically make her the most important person in the room. Those 3 days were instructive. Kiranel walked through Terra Station, observing how humans interacted with other species. She saw a human engineer explaining a technical problem to a Renthi trader, both of them working together to find a solution. She watched human children playing with young ones from 3 different species in a recreation area, none of them caring about diplomatic protocols or cultural hierarchies. She overheard a human doctor teaching medical techniques to a group of... They talked for 2 hours, not about politics or diplomacy, not about treaties or alliances. They talked about what Jake had learned traveling through space, meeting different species, finding common ground with people who looked nothing like humans. They talked about what Kiranel had discovered on her tour, seeing her empire's influence through new eyes. I keep thinking about something one of my people said, Kiranel admitted. She asked why the Empire had never offered partnership the way you do, and I realized I didn't have a good answer. We've always done things a certain way, and no one questioned it because it worked. But working and being right are not the same thing. Jake nodded. My grandmother used to say that just because something is traditional doesn't make it good. Every generation has to look at what they inherited and decide what to keep and what to change. That's harder than it sounds when you're talking about an empire that has existed for thousands of years. I imagine it is, Jake agreed. But you're thinking about it now. That's a start. Kiranel hesitated, then asked the question that had been bothering her. Why did you agree to see me? You could have refused. After what I did, no one would have blamed you. Jake considered his answer carefully. Because people can change. And because refusing to give someone a chance to make things right just perpetuates the problem. You came here without an official delegation. Without trying to make this a public event. That told me this was genuine. He smiled slightly. Besides, my grandmother also used to say that holding grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to get sick. It doesn't help anyone. Your grandmother sounds like she was very wise. She was. She died 3 years ago, but I still hear her voice in my head sometimes, giving advice. Jake's expression was fond. She would have liked you, I think. She always said the mark of a good person was their willingness to admit when they were wrong and try to do better. They talked about their respective homes. Kiranel described Voria Prime, the crystal cities, the ancient libraries, the sense of history that permeated everything. Jake told her about Earth, the diversity of landscapes and cultures, the way humanity still struggled with its own divisions even while reaching for the stars. We're not perfect, Jake said. Not by a long shot. Humans fight with each other all the time. We have different governments, different beliefs, different ways of seeing the world. But maybe that's part of why we're good at working with other species. We're used to dealing with difference. The Empire values unity, Kiranel said. Everyone following the same protocols, the same hierarchies, the same ways of thinking. It creates stability. It also creates rigidity, Jake pointed out gently. If everyone thinks the same way, how do you adapt when circumstances change? It was a good question. Kiranel thought about the Empire's slow, careful approach to everything. It had worked for millennia, but the galaxy was changing faster now. New species were emerging, new technologies developing, new ideas spreading. The Vorian Empire's strength had always been its stability, but maybe that was becoming a weakness. Finally, Kiranel asked what she really wanted to know. What happens now? With us, I mean. With humanity and the Vorian Empire. Jake was quiet for a moment. That depends on what you want to happen. I want us to start over. To meet as equals, the way you originally hoped. But I don't know if the Empire is ready for that. Many of my people still believe in our superiority. Changing that will take time. Then take the time, Jake said simply. Humanity isn't going anywhere. We'll keep doing what we've been doing. Building friendships, helping where we can, treating others with respect. When the Empire is ready to engage with us on those terms, we'll be here. You're not angry? You don't want revenge for what I did? Jake shook his head. What would be the point? You apologized. You meant it. You're trying to be better. That's all anyone can ask for. Holding on to anger beyond that doesn't help me, and it doesn't help you. It just keeps everyone stuck in the past. Kiranel felt something release in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she had been fearing this conversation, worrying that Jake would reject her apology or use it as a weapon against her. Instead, he had accepted it with grace and moved forward. Can I ask you something else? She said. The species you've been helping, the friendships you've been building, you really don't want anything from them except respect? We want trade relationships, Jake clarified. We want to exchange knowledge and culture. We want allies we can call on if we're in trouble. But those things come naturally from friendship. You don't have to force them or demand them. If you treat people well, they generally want to treat you well in return. That seems too simple. Most important things are simple, Jake said. It's just that simple and easy are not the same thing. Treating people with respect is simple, but it's not always easy. It requires putting aside assumptions and prejudices. It requires seeing others as they actually are, not as you expect them to be. They eventually moved on to practical matters. Kiranel wanted to know if there was any way to begin rebuilding the relationship between humanity and the Vorian Empire. Jake thought about it. Start small, he suggested. Don't try to change everything at once. Maybe the Empire could send some observers to coalition meetings. Not as members, not yet, just to see how we work together. And maybe we could arrange some cultural exchanges. Human students studying on Voria Prime. Vorian students visiting Earth. Let people get to know each other as individuals before worrying about official relationships. Kiranel liked the idea. It was practical and gradual. It wouldn't force the Empire to admit error or change fundamental policies. It would just open doors that had been closed. I'll propose it to my mother, she said. I think she'll agree. She has been more open to change than most of the court. Your mother is the Empress. If she supports this, that matters. They talked for another hour about logistics and possibilities. Jake introduced her to Lisa Grant, who had ideas about how cultural exchanges could be structured. They discussed which Vorian client states might be interested in joining the coalition as independent members rather than remaining under Empire protection. It was all theoretical for now, but it felt productive. As the meeting was ending, Kiranel said, "Thank you, Commander, for listening, for accepting my apology, for giving me a chance to make things better." "Thank you for coming here," Jake replied, "for having the courage to admit you were wrong. That's not easy for anyone, and I imagine it's especially hard for a princess of the Vorian Empire." Kiranel smiled, a genuine expression. "It was terrifying, but my mother once told me that growth requires discomfort. I'm beginning to understand what she meant." As she left the conference room, Kiranel felt lighter than she had in months. The apology she had been carrying like a weight was finally delivered and accepted. But more than that, she had gained something unexpected: respect for the human commander and hope for the future. She spent 2 more days on Terra Station before returning to Voria Prime. She used the time to observe and learn more. She attended a coalition meeting, sitting quietly in the observers section watching how the different species interacted. There was no formal hierarchy, no rigid protocol. Representatives spoke when they had something to say, listened when others were talking, and worked together to solve problems. It was chaotic compared to Vorian court proceedings, but it was also energetic and creative. People weren't afraid to disagree or suggest new ideas. The humans facilitated the discussions but didn't dominate them. Jake had been right. This was partnership, not leadership. She also spent time in the station's public areas watching normal interactions. She saw a human child fall and scrape her knee. A Plenari woman, one of the agricultural species Kiranel had visited, immediately stopped to help. She cleaned the wound with water from her own bottle and comforted the crying child until the parents arrived. The human parents thanked the Plenari woman profusely, and she just smiled and said that children were precious to everyone. It was a small moment, barely worth noticing. But Kiranel realized it represented something important. These people genuinely cared about each other. Not because of treaties or obligations, but because they had built real relationships based on mutual respect and shared experiences. When she finally returned to Voria Prime, Kiranel went immediately to report to her mother. The Empress listened to everything, asking occasional questions but mostly letting her daughter tell the story in her own way. "And Commander Morrison accepted your apology?" Zarathel asked when Kiranel finished. "He did, and he meant it. He didn't use it as leverage or make demands. He just accepted it and talked about moving forward." "That shows character," the Empress observed. "Many would have used your vulnerability against you. He's not like that. None of the humans I met were. They're practical and honest. They say what they mean and follow through on their commitments." Kiranel paused. "Mother, I think we need to fundamentally reconsider how we engage with other species. Not abandon our values or our strength, but add new approaches. Learn from what the humans are doing right." The Empress was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Change is difficult for an empire as old as ours. Many will resist. Many will see it as weakness or betrayal of tradition." 1 year after Jake Morrison walked out of the Vorian throne room, Terra Station was celebrating. The Coalition of Free Worlds had grown to 30 member species, and today they were formally establishing a permanent council. It wasn't a government or an empire, just a framework for cooperation, a place where members could bring problems and work on solutions together. Jake stood on the observation deck, watching ships arrive from dozens of different worlds. Each one carried representatives who had chosen to be here, who saw value in partnership over hierarchy. It was messy and complicated and sometimes frustrating, but it was working. "Big day," Lisa said, joining him at the window. She had been promoted to Director of Cultural Affairs, managing the exchange programs that had become surprisingly popular. "Never thought we'd get here when we were walking out of that throne room." "Neither did I," Jake admitted. "I just wanted to make a point. I didn't expect it to lead to all this. Your grandmother would say you started a revolution." Jake laughed. "She'd probably say I just got stubborn and accidentally made it work." The celebration that evening was held in the station's largest common area. Music played, a mix of sounds from different worlds creating something unique. Food from 24 cultures filled long tables. Children from various species ran around playing games that didn't have names yet, because they were making them up as they went. Jake spent the evening talking with representatives and friends. The Renthi leader Essa had come, her weathered face split by a proud smile. "You remember when you first came to my world?" she asked. "We were desperate, dying of thirst. You helped without asking what you would gain. That day changed everything." "You would have done the same for us," Jake said, "maybe. But you did it first. You showed us what partnership could look like." Essa gestured around the room. "Look at what that created." A young plenary farmer named Thomas approached, nervous but determined. "Commander Morrison, I wanted to thank you. The techniques your people taught us saved our farms. My family has enough to eat now. My children will grow up without hunger. That's what matters," Jake said warmly. "Take care of them." As the evening continued, Jake found himself thinking about Princess Kiranel. They had stayed in occasional contact over the past year through official messages. She had reported that the Vorian Empire was slowly, carefully beginning to shift its approach. Cultural exchanges had started. Vorian observers were attending coalition meetings. It wasn't dramatic change, but it was change. Then he saw her. Princess Kiranel stood at the entrance to the common area, looking uncertain. She wasn't wearing elaborate royal robes this time, just simple traveling clothes. She had come alone, without guards or ceremony. Jake excused himself from his conversation and walked over to her. "Princess, I didn't know you were coming. I wasn't sure I should," she admitted. "This is your celebration for what you've built." "I didn't want to intrude." "You're not intruding. Come on, I'll introduce you to people." He led her into the crowd. Some species recognized her and tensed, remembering the power and arrogance of the Vorian Empire, but Kiranel surprised them. She asked questions instead of making pronouncements. She listened more than she spoke. She showed genuine interest in their stories and experiences. At one point, she ended up talking with Essa. The old Renthi woman studied the princess for a long moment, then said, "You're different from how I imagined Vorian royalty." "I'm trying to be," Kiranel replied honestly. "I'm learning that the things I was taught growing up were not always right." "That's hard to admit," Essa said. "I respect that." Later, Kiranel found Jake again. They walked to a quieter corner of the room where they could talk. "The Empire is changing," she told him. "Slowly. Too slowly for my liking, but it's happening. We've signed 3 mutual aid agreements with species we used to consider clients. We're offering technology sharing instead of technology dependence. It's not enough yet, but it's a start." "That's significant," Jake said. "Change takes time, especially for something as large as your empire." "I keep thinking about what you said, about teaching people how to treat you. The Empire taught other species to treat us as superior, and they did. But that created resentment underneath the obedience. Now we're trying to teach them something different." She paused. "It's harder than I expected. Nothing worthwhile is easy." Kiranel smiled. "Another one of your grandmother's sayings? Actually, that one's mine. But she'd probably agree with it." They stood together watching the celebration. Humans and aliens mixing freely, talking, laughing, sharing food and stories. It was chaotic and loud and wonderful. "Do you ever regret it?" Kiranel asked. "Walking away that day? You could have stayed. Tried to work within our system. Gained our approval. It might have been easier." Jake shook his head. "No regrets." "Because this?" He gestured to the room full of species working together. "This wouldn't have happened if we'd accepted being treated as inferior. We would have been one more client state, grateful for Vorian recognition following your rules. Instead, we built something new, something based on what we believed in. And you changed the galaxy in the process. We're trying to, one friendship at a time." The formal part of the evening began. Representatives from each coalition member spoke briefly about what the alliance meant to them. The theme that emerged was consistent: partnership, respect, mutual support. No one talked about dominance or hierarchy. They talked about working together toward common goals. When it was Jake's turn to speak, he kept it short. "A year ago, humanity was trying to figure out our place in the galaxy. We wanted recognition from the old powers, approval from established civilizations, and we didn't get it. But that rejection taught us something important. We don't need anyone's permission to be valuable. We don't need anyone's approval to know our worth. We just need to live according to our principles and find others who share them." He looked around the room at the diverse crowd. "This coalition isn't perfect. We argue, we disagree, we make mistakes, but we do it as equals. We face our challenges together, and we treat each other with the respect that every sapient being deserves. That's all we've ever wanted. That's all anyone should want. Thank you all for being here, for being part of this, for choosing partnership over power. To the coalition. To the coalition, the crowd echoed, voices mixing in different languages and tones. After the speeches, the celebration continued into the night. Jake found a quiet moment alone on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. So much had changed in 1 year. Humanity had found its place not by seeking approval but by being worthy of respect. The galaxy was slowly shifting toward a new model of cooperation. And it had all started because he refused to accept being treated as inferior. Kiranel joined him again. I wanted to tell you something, she said. The Council on Voria Prime has voted. The Empire is formally requesting to join the coalition of free worlds, not as leaders or superiors. As equal members. Jake turned to look at her, surprised. That's huge. Are you sure the Empire is ready for that? No, Kiranel admitted. But we'll never be ready if we don't try. And I convinced my mother that if we want to remain relevant in the galaxy, we need to adapt. This